Now, both Mary's objection or question and Zachariah's question are rooted actually scientifically. They both have biological objections to the angel's message, right? This is biology 101. Zachariah, I'm old, my wife is old, do the maths, babies, very remote chance. Now, Zechariah should have known better, because if he'd been reading his Old Testament, he would know that God actually has a history of delivering babies to, unlikely people, regardless of age. But, let's just leave that aside. Mary's objection is also scientifically grounded. I'm a virgin. I haven't known a man. To have a baby? Now, if you're confused about this, Pastor John will deal with this in the Q&A. And he'll explain to you what's going on. But please hear the point here. They both have scientific objections to the divine revelation as to what God can actually do. But Zechariah's question is not a question that's going to permit an answer. And his skepticism in the face of this revelation invites judgment. Mary, however, is simply confused. She hasn't been praying. She hasn't been asking. The angel comes. She has a question of legitimate confusion. I don't understand how this is biologically possible. The necessary steps have not been fulfilled. And the angel says, let me explain to you how this will happen. In our day and age, there are a lot of scientific objections to God, but most of them are completely misunderstood. There is no intellectual shame. There should be no hesitation in our hearts or minds as to the truth and the reality of the gospel that has been given to us, or even indeed of the nature of it, or how it relates to science, or indeed anything else. Mary and Zechariah both have a scientific objection. Zechariah's question is, I think, as I say, I'm convinced, born out of a position of complete skepticism. He'd been praying for this, and so when the answer is announced, he still won't accept it. How can I know this? Mary, it comes out of the blue. She has no idea. She says, how is this possible? And God says, well, this is how it will go. And she responds in worship. Now, this is a very happy story. This is why evangelists like this passage, okay? Because Zechariah's story also ends in worship, right? The baby's born, his mouth is opened, and he praises God. Okay, that's the kind of stories that evangelists like to tell. 100% response rate, genuine worship before God. We need to take the time and the effort in this culture to know that this gospel is true. To understand that the questions which people bring about that come from confusion can actually be dealt with and answered. Could you answer them? If someone asked you, why are you a Christian? Could you answer it? Have you ever noticed when people are asked why they are Christians, they respond by saying how they became a Christian? Have you ever noticed that? Well, I met this person, they gave me a book, I went to their church, I heard this message, I became a Christian. What does that sound like to a non-Christian? You ever thought that? Doesn't it sound very random again? If you met a Muslim that day, and he gave you a Quran, and invited you to the mosque, you'd be a Muslim, right? So that's the explanation. Chance. Lucky you. You believe that? It also sounds a bit like brainwashing, doesn't it? You met this person, they persuaded you, you responded to their persuasion, now you're a Christian, you've been brainwashed. One of my friends, when he became a Christian, his mother said to him, you've been brainwashed. He looked at his mother and said, if you knew what was in my brain, you'd be glad it's been washed. Is that the answer? I had a lucky break. How we became a Christian and why this is true. They're not the same question, and they do not deserve the same answer. Can we respond to the honest questions in our culture which are born of confusion? And so long as we're running scared that maybe this is not true, we'll run from them. But we have no need to feel that shame. This is true. Now, the second source of shame, and we're not going to have time to go into this in huge detail, is moral shame. Now, I'm not talking about moral issues so much in our culture, although most Christians feel they're on the wrong end of every moral debate. But it seems to me, in the Western world at least, there's a sense of moral shame connected with the gospel. When we're asked questions like, if your God is so loving, why couldn't he just forgive us? Doesn't that seem reasonable? Or, why does Christ have to die on the cross in order for us to be forgiven? Why is that necessary? Now, those are huge questions. I'm wondering how many Christians in the average church could answer those two questions correctly. Could you? It surprises me that so many Christians are scared of being asked a question like that when we should be rejoicing that someone's asked us a question like that. That is a great question. Thank you for asking me that. I'd love to talk with you about God's love and God's justice. I would love to talk to you about the necessity of the cross, why there was no other way. What a gift of a question. So long as we remain so theologically confused about the basic moral questions about God and the primary objections that most people have, the primary struggle that most people have about the gospel in the Western world is moral. And this is both outside the church and inside the church. Why isn't God more obvious? If he wants us to believe in him, why doesn't he just, every day, 6 p.m. broadcast from heaven to us? That would do it, right? Or, why doesn't God sort of lend us angels on rotation? Everybody gets Gabriel for a week. So 1 week it's David Platt's turn and Gabriel comes along and you go door knocking with him. You knock on the door. Hi, we're here from the local church. We want to tell you about Jesus. They're about to slam it. Gabriel puts his foot in the door. He suddenly grows to 5 times what his size was before. He withdraws his angelic sword, which is flashing with light, and as he slowly turns it in his hands, he says, we would really like to come in and talk with you. I mean, wouldn't that help? Why isn't he more obvious? Why does he allow all this suffering? How can this loving God judge us? These are all moral complaints about God's character. The primary number of struggles people have in the Western world to do with the gospel and with the scripture is moral. And that seems to me to be just as true within the church as without the church. Therefore, how desperately do we need to get a clear understanding of what these questions are? Let me ask you, those questions I just gave you, why isn't God more obvious? Why does God allow suffering? What about people who haven't heard? How can a loving God judge us? Is there anyone here who has never been asked that question? One of those questions. Just put up your hand. Don't be ashamed if you've never been asked a question like that. I don't know, I don't see any hands, but if you put your hand up, shame on you. You're not going out at all. You can't be. You must be somehow, I don't know, living in the middle of nowhere. We already know what the questions are. They're not surprising. We actually know what the questions are before they've been asked. Is it possible that in the Western world, we're struggling with the intellectual doubt about whether it's true because we've never taken the time for proper discipleship to actually know that it is true? Is it possible that we're feeling morally ashamed? So we're not actually going out to those who are lost and perishing without the gospel because we don't know how to properly explain this glorious gospel in all of its fullness in order that we may not, again, be ashamed.